Hello, everyone. This is Ed Amoroso from Tag Cyber, and I'm here today with Kevin Lynch, who is the CEO and board member at Optiv. And it's just wonderful to have Kevin here. We're going to learn quite a bit from him today. So, Kevin, welcome, and thanks for spending some time today.
Ed, thank you for having me. It's just wonderful to be with you. Always good to talk about a topic of our passion.
Yeah. I think Optiv may be one of those companies where you don't need to provide too much intro, but maybe if you could just say a word about what you guys do. And then you and I are going to touch on a number of themes related to threat and technology and trends, but maybe a word or two about what the company does would be a good way to get started.
You bet. And I'll give the summary, summary level and just a couple of comments below that. I mean, oftentimes we're characterized in many different ways because we represent a platform for our clients. And I have this very strong view that's carried out through our strategy that we meet our clients where they are on a journey of security and resilience. So for one client, we may look like a technology provider, and for another, we may look like a fantastic managed services partner, and everything in between. For many clients, it's all things in between. Sometimes we're characterized as a value-added reseller. Sometimes we're characterized as a technical services shop. Sometimes as an advisory partner. Sometimes as a security solutions integrator. At the end of the day, I think we are ultimately a security partner for our clients. And I think I use this phrase internally, we stand on the shoulders of giants. Thankfully, over the years, people put many of those cornerstones in place. And then from there, we've really built this platform of how to serve clients, meet them where they are, lay out a journey, take them down the path of a more secure and resilient, importantly, resilient infrastructure.
Now, from that vantage point, you have an amazing sort of visibility into this crazy cyber threat that seems to be going a little nuts. Like I have my mother calling me now saying, "What in the world is going on?" And when people ask you, I'm curious what you think. Like, are these things we see on the news every day and the nation state attacks? What's going on, Kevin?
Well, I think that we're seeing more in the press for sure. And I think we're seeing it for a number of reasons. I'll come at this from two different directions. One, we are often asked, gee, we're throwing more and more and more capital to this, more technology at this. You see an enormous innovation system out there that's creating code and assets to be used. And so on one level, the industry is growing exponentially in terms of the solutions. But at the same time, with the rise of every use of every technology, whether it's artificial intelligence, whether it's quantum computing, you name it, there's a similar capitalization and rise on the threat side. So just understand, and I often use this metaphor that it's like two racers walk into the arena, and the arena is the world, and it's a battle, right? And you're thinking competitive as a mindset immediately, but it's actually adversary. And you're on this track together, and you're laying down calories to exert to run faster, but so is the adversary. And you're step to step, toe to toe. And I think that's been the role of this industry and the professionals that we serve, and ultimately the boards that we answer to, which is keep me in step with the threat and maybe a little bit ahead. I think where the industry is ultimately heading is now doing that because you have to be capitalized. It's not a where you win with just a check, but you can't be absent that. But now it's actually starting to think ahead, getting proactive about the assets that you have, understanding your network, your environment, understanding your own digital transformation, testing and thinking of worst case scenarios in that. In your board and governance role, I know you have an experience with how do we actually create the black swan and everything between that and a day issue. Organizations need to be testing and thinking out, and we often call that a future built mindset. How do you think about 5, 6, 10, 30 steps down that arena track that I referred to in the metaphor, and be thinking ahead of the threat actor? Because the threat actor is more capitalized today than they've ever been. And I would tell you, we often have this image in our head that it's a 14-year-old in the grandmother's basement with a T1 down the eyelet window and a couple of old PCs, and they're uber intelligent and it's directed in the wrong way. But the vast, vast majority, the overwhelming majority of this threat is for sure nation state and organized crime. And every single win that they have in terms of ransomware, et cetera, or using their capabilities to garnish more capital is applied back into the profession. So for us, it's a continuing growing threat basis. And the second thing I'd mention is our landscapes have changed. right?
Mhm.
This notion of an attack surface, as it's often called, has changed dramatically, and that curve's not gonna that's not gonna change. We often used to talk in the 90s about the technology dividend. You know, our Fed chair at the time loved to comment the fact that we'd seen a rise in our economy because of the use of technology. He was right. But at the same time, that continued and pervasive growth of the use of technology, digitization of our businesses, digital transformation, if you prefer, just creates a far bigger technology attack surface by which the bad actors are really taking advantage. So we're in a game that's going to continue to grow. And to your mother's question in the phone call, I think they're going to continue to be on the news.
And I would add to your points, which I agree with completely. It's automation that's coming at us. There's technology being used to attack. I'm curious if the tech coming at us is getting better. Are there some technologies that you and your team see that maybe look promising to maybe tip the scale back in the direction of the good guys at some point?
Look, there's an enormous wave of technologies out there, and you could break down the enterprise and think about what's the new, latest, and greatest in any particular facet of it, right? I was on with a really wonderful CEO and leader of a newer startup in this space, kind of getting to that mid-stage round of financing, doing some great work around email security. And we often think, well, isn't that something that's a space that's already deeply covered? But they're taking a different stance on this and a slightly different approach, almost down to what I'll call the behavioral level. And I think of that and I'm like, that's really fascinating. And given that most of the attack surface remains penetrated through email, it's 90+%, I love to see that. But by the same token, I also love to see some of the developments in proactive threat hunting. I think that MDR, XDR has been a very strong space over the years and getting stronger. It remains very much, log data centric and not broad-based data using more artificial intelligence to scan for a threat. And so I think you're going to see some evolution there over time where many ingestion tools, a lot of what I'll call multi-tenancy on the back end, but real innovation in the center to be able to take in and ingest broad sweeps of data beyond lag data and then take that and look for sort of erroneous activity. And I think that's going to go again from just entry points that are traditional, but also into a lot of the utilities that have become the de jure favorite of some of the recent nation state attacks.
Do you see in addition to like these tech innovations like the XDR and so on? Totally agree. Those are awesome. Do you see architectural innovations too? Like as we whip the perimeter out and start looking at like zero trust being an example of something that people are rearranged. Seems like that's just as important. Like these conceptual ideas, or with zero trust, we have no more perimeter.
Right.
What are your customers saying? Are those buzzwords, or are they really using them to improve their infrastructure?
Well, I'd say there's many of those. And I mean, whether they're buzzwords, whether they're programs, whether they're thematic elements, I think they are becoming the North Stars for many of our more enlightened and informed clients, right? And I think there's generation sort of, we'll call it bottoms up for lack of a better way to put it. I don't really think in hierarchical terms all the time, but it's that CISO up into the organization. How do I better defend the organization? I think it's also now coming from the boardroom down, which I think is a very healthy trend. But a couple that come to mind, I'm going to pick up on your zero trust comment because we see a ton of technologies out there, right? They're, to the earlier question, they're everywhere. There's a phenomenal and I think very thankful innovation layer in our industry. And so we're not absent technology and options. And this may sound a little in the weeds for a CEO to mention, or for that fact, the CEO to listen and say, wow, I've got to pay attention and ask about that. But I do think zero trust is a really powerful thematic North Star for organizations to utilize. Got to move to a model where every person, every device is trusted, zero, in terms of its entry for information and access as a default. And today, by the way, that's not a pervasive standard. So I think that zero trust is very much a thing to take stock of. I think in parallel, physical security gets overshadowed an awful lot in our space. And yet, if you spend time with some white hat hackers, and there are some phenomenal ones out there, and I've had the privilege of spending some time with them, many of them on our payroll, actually, some outside, they would tell you it remains an exceptional way, to find a way into an organization. So, I think physical security can't be overshadowed in the future. I think that goes all the way from employees and customers all the way through to supply chain. And I think supply chain was a very old and stale topic in the 80s, and today it might be the top of many people's lists. I think that network segmentation is something that is again often talked about, but I think that many don't have a perfect view of what their network actually looks like, especially when they extend that formerly referred to as perimeter to include a lot of their ecosystem partners, because there's no question over time industries have become more connected. We've gotten into digital trading. And as such, our perimeter, if you could go back to that old concept, has really extended quite a bit. And then the last, I mentioned this to you in the earlier discussion, it's this notion of multi-tenancy, right?
Yeah.
How do we connect? How do we collaborate? And I'm really interested in that. I think it's an early trend. I'm not convinced that we will see, big pervasive programs on this in the next 1 to 2 years, but I am convinced that over the 4 to 5 year period, we're going to see more of this. And I think it's going to be a mandate. And I'm looking at signal intelligence like where 1600 Pennsylvania has come down on the need for more collaboration and the recent executive orders. I'm looking at a lot of chatter in the global environment about standards, and is this, given its impact on economies, a UN-sized issue, and does it require more collaboration, more standard creation? It would not surprise me, and I'll give you a really far-fetched idea. A lot of press this week actually with the move in Europe around carbon credits, but that's been a topic that's been around for many, many years now. Imagine a world where we had cyber credits. And the reason I throw that concept out is that, today you might have 4 or 5 industry competitors in the same environment, but they make different choices in terms of investing in their network security and resilience. Well, they're still competitors at the end of the day. So what's the barrier to collaborating and sharing threat data and intelligence? Well, it's one feels like they overcapitalize it, and one feels like they're using that capital in a different direction, again, in a competitive way. And so if we got to a point where we could actually trade cyber credits like carbon credits, so resilience became a factor in trading, and much like the EU came out and said, and I think Germany was at the forefront of this, they're going to put a tariff on people that are less carbon friendly in the world. Imagine if you did the same in your trading environment, in your ecosystem. So a little out there in the ethereal mist, if you bear with that, Ed, but I'm going to tell you, I think that's going to come with age.
I think that's your blog for tomorrow morning. That's a pretty good idea. So I like that very much. I hope
I do have an article that's going to come out on a notable publication sort of tech council on that soon. So maybe we'll get ahead of it a little bit with the blog.
A good idea. Now, I want to ask you about the work that your team does at Optiv. We've talked about these forces, the threat, all this technology, architecture, and certainly digital transformation. Most of the medium to larger companies are going through that now. When you're doing cybersecurity in the context of that, it's got to be pretty complicated. I'm curious, is the role of a security system integrator to kind of help orchestrate that? Do you find yourself, working with clients to fight all that complexity and help them figure out more or less what to do here? Because again, one thing you never hear is, boy, I wish there was more cybersecurity tools. I mean, there's thousands of them. It's just figuring out what to do seems like the problem. Is that a central problem that you guys address at Optiv?
Yeah, very much so. And I think we attack it at multiple layers. I'll touch upon a few. First, and increasingly, I think we're seeing some of our senior clients, and even into the boardroom as well, where we're being engaged, not indirectly with the board, but through the CISO into the board to support their agenda, having us come and spend time talking about digital transformation, their roadmap and plans. Obviously, there's a benefit to that for the organization economically. And what's our view around architecting a program to be resilient through that change? So we see it at that advisory level across the organization. I think we see it in terms of the existing assets and infrastructure. And look, a mid-tier client for us carries some 75 to 80 different security tools and assets. And so we see it there not only in terms of evaluating the appropriateness of certain technology, going through use cases, spending some of our time on our client solution architects, in the trenches with CISOs, going through use cases and really understanding fit rather than just acquiring assets, because I think we've been in an industry where CISOs were in effect rewarded for inputs. And I do believe we are moving to an industry that's more rewarded by outcomes. So spending time around use cases and adoption, we're getting a lot of time and traction doing that to support clients. And of course, tying assets together and even into managing assets where many of our clients come to us and say, look, this is a core competency for you and not for us. And my security team, relative to our mission and to our digital transformation efforts, is, understaffed. And it's a very difficult market for us to go garnish talent. It's a difficult market for everybody. So why don't I put more of this on your shoulders and move you as an operating partner for us? So you see it there. And then last, what I'd say is, if you look at most digital transformation in organizations today, not 95%, but certainly well north of the median line, a lot of it is in applications and app dev. And I don't have enough digits to count and pen strokes to put on paper the number of times I've heard from organizations where they say, we're driving that as an engine very quickly. And in some ways, we're doing all the things around agile development and we're moving fast because the prize is there, but we're treating security as an afterthought. And I think it's a lot different than just traditional infrastructure security, and getting application security to be a forethought versus an afterthought, embedding it into the code and development, I think is becoming a more common discussion point and thread of our involvement. We're doing a lot more on that front today. And I think, to me, that's exciting. On one level, I think it's challenging because you don't want to impair or slow a business's progress point, but I think it's a place where we can actually make a difference. So if you go back and measure yourself on critical mission and can we deliver different outcomes, that's a place where I believe we can.
Those are super valuable services. I'm so glad you guys are doing that. I know a lot of companies really do benefit. I know my own career worked frequently with your team, and it's always been a wonderful experience. That's crystal ball time. I'm going to ask you maybe to give us a little peek when you think about the future, and you have to be willing to go negative here if you're worried. But what do you think? Are you optimistic, kind of pessimistic? What do you think about cybersecurity? What direction are we headed, and what's coming in the next, say, couple of years?
I'm still an optimist in this, but I'm going to measure my optimism by, I'm an optimist of the lane in which we stand on the side of right, so to speak, that I think we're going to win this long-term war, but it won't come without its degrees of difficulty. I think those degrees of difficulty are going to touch an environment today that is, rapidly growing. It's in the news every day. It's certainly, if you look at it from a Wall Street basis, highly capitalized and growing. If you look at it from a CISO budget, it's growing. If you look at it from a board agenda, Ed, you would know this yourself personally. This was rarely on the board agenda 5 to 7 years ago.
True.
And if it was perfunctory, right? It was, we're going to have our annual conversation with the CISO. And today, I've spent some time with various chapters of the National Association of Corporate Directors, and it comes up in every conversation. Where do we go find cyber skilled board members, and should we have a dedicated cyber professional on the board? Much like we've had a dedicated human resource professional on the board, and obviously accounting and finance professionals on the board, and strategy, et cetera. So I think you're going to see that it's a shift in modality there. I think we're going to see fascinating changes in this landscape. I do think you will see a rise in collaboration. It'll be slow to start, but I think it will gain steam. I think that's going to precipitate, along with the capital structure that we see in the industry and the innovation base, more consolidation, where today you have this real fragmented, almost field of 1,000 blooming flowers in terms of potential solutions. Some larger, some more proven, some early stage, and 4 people in a conference room, in Tel Aviv, and everything in between. And I do think you're going to see some platforms consolidation, not maybe all the way to one single provider or a handful of providers that have everything, but I think you're going to see enough consolidation in the industry. And I think it's going to happen not only because of that necessity for collaboration and threat sharing, but it's also going to happen because the end user, the customer, the organization, the enterprise is going to start knitting assets together and almost painting the roadmap for their buy case in terms of what should come together and why. And we're seeing it in terms of our work pattern, in terms of creating connectivity among assets. It's a rising part of our engagement with clients. And then last, I think you're going to see a real shift in what I'll call, public-private partnerships and multi-tenancy. And I'll tie that together with the crazy idea I threw out around, cyber credits. I think you're going to see this swirl of how do we work more closely together? How do we take intelligence that might be garnished at a national level, take standards that might be established at even a global level, a UN type level, and actually start to work to that? Because I think it's going to take an organized coalition, much like the threat actors have moved into organized crime at nation state level. They're very well capitalized because they've come together versus being 5,000 individual folks out there. Now, I do think that you're going to continue to see open source sort of threat where people are sort of almost offering bounties of threat. You'll still see that on the positive side where, again, you have a lot of white hat activity out there that is crowdsourced today. I do still think also that we're going to be, if you measure this solely on talent, and this gets talked about a lot, Ed, in our industry, our war for talent is going to continue. So if we measured 5 years out, I think a few of my predictions will be absolutely true. And one of them is we'll still be in a war for talent. And I think part of that collaboration at a public-private partnership level has to be making this more mainstream curriculum and creating the professionals to feed the industry. I know for me, we're focused not only on the traditional schools, but a few where we can embed a little differently and actually influence the curriculum, because I think this is going to be an investor would look at this as a growth industry. For me, I look at this as a talent management and jobs industry where it's going to require really strong technical professionals, advisory professionals, and architects. And I think we have a responsibility to help build them, shape them, grow them, and matriculate them into the industry. Hopefully, many of them stick with Optiv, but wherever they go, it's the mission we should be focused on.
Well, that's all very sensible thinking. I'm glad you're doing that. I share your sentiment about the talent challenge. I think that will continue to be tough. But Kevin, on behalf of our team at Tag Cyber, everyone who's watching, I want to thank you for sharing your ideas with us. Keep up the good fight there at Optiv. We're very reliant on companies like yours to keep us safe, and we all appreciate the work you do. So thanks so much for sharing today.
Ed, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure, and like I said, it's a mission of passion for us. So, any chance we get to talk about it outside of doing it, we're delighted. So, thank you for having me.
Please keep up the good work. Appreciate it. And for everyone else watching, we'll see you next time.